practicing the art of patience, I say this is good. Good morning. We're going to continue looking at the stories that Jesus was telling when he was out and about and doing his ministry. And again, we're all familiar with the song, Tell Me the Story of Jesus, but this is Tell Me the Stories of Jesus. And so this morning, I want to think about a needed apocalypse. Now, you might look at that and think, I have no idea what that even means. A needed apocalypse. So I want you to picture it's time to wake your children up to go to school. And at our house, it's at around 7:30 in the morning. Now it's summertime, so school's over. We don't need to do that anymore. Unfortunately for me, I'm awake no matter what, so I'm already awake to wake them up, even though they don't need to be woken up at 7:30. But I really want to. One of our children in particular does not want to get out of bed ever. 11 o'clock in the morning is a little too early for this one. I would tell you who she is, but then Natalie would be embarrassed. Oh, I did it. She would be embarrassed. Actually, she would not be embarrassed at all by this. To wake her up. Some of our children you can wake up with just a gentle word. Our oldest, I can just nudge her and say, hey, time to get up. And she'll, okay, Dad. And she's up. Caden, I'll walk in, and he's already awake. I'm like, hey, bud, just checking. Close the door. But Natalie, you gotta rock her. It's not enough just to go in and say, hey, Natalie, time to wake up. And I can't just nudge her a little bit and say, hey, Natalie, no, for real this time to get up. I have to grab that child and shake her in her mattress like this until her whole body's flopping around. And I'll say, love, it's time to get up and ready for school. And she'll go, okay, and right back to sleep. It's a needed apocalypse. An apocalypse is something that it's a revealing, it's an opening up. And an apocalypse is something when it's opened up, you finally see it. It's like trying to wake a small child from their slumber. Sometimes you got to shake them pretty good, or they're not going to wake up. Many of the stories that Jesus told served that purpose. They're meant to wake you up. They're meant to reveal a reality to you that you're otherwise closed to, like a child who won't get out of bed and doesn't want to get out of bed, but someone comes along, and this is how my father would wake us up, with a metal trash can lid and a stick. Time to get up. And we were up. Jesus' parables work as an alarm clock, a spiritual alarm clock that will awaken us to a reality that we otherwise do not see or do not want to see. That's why last week I said his stories are radical, because they're meant to shake us. And we're meant to be done listening to a story and walk away saying, what am I supposed to do with this story? And you might wonder, why didn't Jesus just say clearly what it is he wanted to say? Why didn't he just walk in and say, Pharisees, you're wrong, here's why, boom, bada bing, done, next? Wouldn't that have been easier? Well, it might have been easier, but it probably would not have been as effective. Sometimes it takes a really good story to wake us up. Because if someone just comes and says, Ignacio, you're wrong, and here's why, you might say, yeah, well, who are you to tell me, well, I'm wrong. I'm going back to bed, right? I'm not going to wake up for that. But if I can tell you a good story, and you start to connect with the characters in the story, and you start to see things about yourself that you didn't see before, then suddenly that story is shaking you, or taking a metal trash can lid and wrapping it around with a stick. It's waking you up to something you otherwise would not recognize. And we actually have a very good parable. It's the first actual parable. I don't know why the mic does that. Every P is powerful. I got to soften up my P's when I say them. Or I just need to wake you up with them. One or the other. The very first parable we have in our scripture, if you read from Genesis and straight through, the very first full-blown parable is told to King David. There's a lot of history between Genesis and King David to not have any parables, but we don't. Now, most of us are probably familiar with the story of David and Bathsheba's husband, Uriah the Hittite, and what transpired there. As you can see in the picture, David is on his balcony. He is overlooking his palace and all of his gardens and houses that surround him. And he sees Bathsheba bathing. Right? And he decides, I want Bathsheba to be mine. So he sends his servants to find out who she is. They come back. That's Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. Now that should be enough to stop a guy to say, oh, well, the first thing should stop him is, that's not my wife. Stop right there. That's not really good enough for David. Hey, that's somebody else's wife. Still not good enough for David. Hey, that's somebody else's wife. You know him. You know the husband. Still not good enough. Oh, the husband, he fights in battles with you. There's no stopping David. Oh, that's who it is? I don't care. And he goes and he gets her, has her brought back to him, and he impregnates her, but he doesn't know it at this point. And he has this master plan when he finds out. He's going to have Uriah the Hittite killed in battle. He has a plan. He has a way to execute that plan. It doesn't go exactly how he wanted, but Uriah does end up dead at the end. And David thinks to himself, wow, there's a reality I've put to bed. May it stay asleep there forever. I will go about my business and do what I do, and no one will ever know. That's his plan. David needs to be woken up. But David is David. He's King David. No one's just going to waltz in to his palace and tell him, David, you're wrong and here's why. And then walk out. And he'll leave a changed man. He's going to need an apocalypse. Something that's going to shake him to his core to wake him up. And luckily, he has a prophet by the name of Nathan who can do just that. And he does it with a story, a parable. The Lord sent Nathan to David. This is obviously after all that with Bathsheba and Uriah had transpired. When Nathan came to him, he said, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. So far, David is listening to this story. There's nothing offensive about it. There's nothing to make him shut his eyes to it or close off his ears to it. He wants to know how the story continues. Okay. And if you read through the history of David, David often falls for stories like this. He had to have been one of the most oblivious people to his own actions of anyone who's ever lived, although I'm sure some of us could rival him. There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. David's already in. He's hooked. Well, what happens? Well, what happens to the rich guy? What does the rich guy do? What does the poor guy do? Does he steal from the rich guy? What happens? What's going on here? Tell me more. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb. That's just a baby lamb that he had bought. Just has one lamb. Now, when you only have one of something, that's a treasured possession. That's something that you love and you care for. It's the only one you have. And the rich man, he's got all sorts of sheep and cattle. And we find out the poor man got his ewe lamb because he purchased it. It's rightfully his. It belongs to him. It doesn't belong to anyone else. This is his and his alone. It sure would be wrong if someone were to come along and take that lamb that deserves to be his, wouldn't it? It says he raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup. A little gross, right? Okay. And even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now, I like pets, but I don't love pets, right? Some of you love pets. And when you speak of your pets, if you didn't tell us it was a pet, I would think you were talking about your own child. And after we're done talking, I walk away and say, what a weird person. That's my first thought, I'll be honest. Why are you talking about your dog like it's a person? And you know what Sally said to me? Sally is a dog, correct? Yes. You know what she said to me? He loved this ewe lamb. It ate at the table with him, drank out of his cup. It's like, hey, little ewe lamb, are you thirsty? Here's my cup. Drink out of it. Ate off his plate. This little ewe lamb was part of the family. When the ewe lamb got tired, he'd pick it up and he'd rock that lamb to sleep in his arms. This man loves his little ewe lamb. Would you agree? Now a traveler came to the rich man. But the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Now, remember the stories of Jesus. We're going to look at one that's very similar to this. But remember how these stories kind of go. They go a lot like this story, correct? They sound a lot like it. There's a man and two sons. There's a party. There's an animal that's slaughtered to celebrate this. All these things happen to they sound similar. Not the same, but similar. This rich man, he has a friend come into town, but he says, I'm not going to grab one of my own sheep or my own cattle to prepare a meal for this traveler who's come to visit me. Instead, and you may have already guessed it if you didn't know the story, this rich man takes the little ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. Now remember, this is the story that Nathan is telling to David. David, having just taken the wife of another man and had that man killed, somehow does not know this story is about him. Right? He has no idea the story is about him. And I read it and I go, how does he not know? But he doesn't know. He has no idea it's about him. And we'll see him become self-righteous against himself. Which, by the way, self-righteousness often does get turned around against yourself. That's why you don't do it. Now, this rich man, he takes the one little ewe lamb that drank out of that man's cup and fell asleep in his arms. He takes this little ewe lamb and decides, that's the one I'm going to sacrifice. That's the one I'm going to kill to celebrate with my friend that's come into town. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. Now, what's happened to David? Watch me. He sees something. Something has been opened up to him. A truth has been revealed to him that he otherwise would have rejected. But now he can accept it because it came in the form of a story. And he's angry, as he should be. Because who would do such a thing? What kind of person, what kind of monster would do something like this? A person like that has no heart. A person like that has no empathy. A person like that, we would say, what a psychopath. We can't have a person like that in our community, David says. That person has to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. You already know where this is going. Probably because you've already heard the story a gazillion times since birth. Doesn't make it any less interesting. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. David needed someone to come and push him in a direction he did not want to go. And coming in with blunt force trauma and saying, David, you did that. That is wrong. You can come up with a million reasons why it wasn't wrong. You can rationalize yourself out of any bad thing you've done by finding reasons why it wasn't as bad as they think it is. Actually, it wasn't bad at all if they knew my circumstance. We can do all of that in our brains. But when someone comes and tells us a story that we're not really sure is even about us, and then you have to disagree with your own conclusion, Because guess what? David disagreed with his own conclusion. David doesn't go and hang himself or have someone kill him off as a punishment. He lives. David had to look himself in the face in a mirror and say, that was me. That's what I did. That's why parables exist. They are meant to bring you to a point that you would otherwise not bring yourself to. They're meant to open your eyes to something that you would have probably preferred to have been blind to. But now you see it. Now you know. You've heard the story. Stories like these can be the cure to spiritual blindness. You know how when you're driving down the road and you look in the mirror, and if you're doing it right, you look in the rearview mirror, you check your side mirror, you turn your blinker on. Do you know why you always have to look unless you've got one of them fancy cars with cameras and whatnot? You know why you have to do this before you change lanes? Because you have a blind spot that you can't see in any of your mirrors. Parables help us to remove that blind spot so we can see the whole picture that perhaps we'd rather not see. But these are not the parables of Nathan we're studying. We're not telling me the stories of Nathan. Tell me the stories of Jesus. You guys want to look at a story from Jesus? Good, because it didn't matter. We're going to anyway, but I'm glad you're here. There was a rich man. This sounds like our very first parable we have in Scripture. There's already similarities. When you compare stories, there's almost always similarities. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus. You ever paid attention to that part of this story? Now, I will back up and say there's some debate as to whether or not this is a parable or a true story. I view it as a parable. You can view it however you want, but for this lesson right now, we're going to talk about it as if it is a parable, okay? Just for now, just humor me if you're fully convinced that it's a true story. That's fine. Just humor me. Bear with me. At his gate was laid a beggar, Lazarus. Lazarus is not able to put himself at the gate. Someone brought him there and dropped him off at the gate. You ever wonder why? Why that gate? Why'd they pick that place? Because the person living in that palace, in that lap of luxury, has the wherewithal to care for him. And when that person leaves their house and goes into town, they will see Lazarus, and it will cost them almost nothing to bless him more than he could probably even handle. So they put him there because that's the best spot for someone to care for Lazarus. So they bring him there and they drop him off and they leave, probably thinking he'll take care of him. He's got him. So at this gate is laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. Parables seem to have lots of characters and animals sometimes. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, it's the rich man, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. And he's probably wondering, why am I not there? I mean, I was obviously blessed in life. I mean, God blessed me richly and fully. Just look at my house. Look at all the animals I had. Look at all the friends that would travel from distant places to come and visit me. I mean, I was obviously blessed by God. So why is Abraham so far away? And why is Lazarus with him? Lazarus and I used to be really close in proximity. Now we couldn't be further apart. Why? So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. Have Lazarus do for me what I would not do for Lazarus. As he laid in agony at the doorstep of my house, and I did nothing, have him do something for me that I wasn't willing to do for him, please. Please, I'm tormented. When I was in junior high, I was in a quartet, and we sang a song, and every time I preach this passage, I think of that song. I want to sing it to you, but I'm missing 3 parts, so I can't. Dip your finger in the water and cool my tongue, for I'm tormented in the flame. That's the lyric. I'm tormented. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Now, for us, we're kind of familiar with the story, so don't want to think about it, but why did Lazarus have to wait to be dead to not be in agony? Think about it. If your first answer comes to your head is, well, because the rich man didn't take care of him, yes, that is true. But why would the rich man have felt compelled to take care of him? Well, maybe he could have been compassionate, empathetic, had sympathy, all these things. True, but it goes deeper than that. The law of Moses required people to take care of other people. It was a requirement of the law for you to love your brother. It was there. It's all throughout Moses. In my Deuteronomy class, as weird as Deuteronomy is, it's all about caring for the people around you. Always. So this guy that's rich that says, I'm blessed by God. Look at everything I have. That's great. But you're not using the blessings the way that God told you to. So Lazarus suffered until the day he died because you didn't obey Moses. At this point in the story, eyes are starting to open. Lazarus had to wait until he was dead to be comforted because of you. It didn't need to be this way. You could have cared for him. You could have provided for him. You could have given him everything that he needed, but you didn't. Now you are in agony. And he is being comforted. And besides all of this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. So in other words, he says, not only does it not even make sense what you're asking, but it's also impossible. It can't even be done. Lazarus literally cannot dip his finger in the water and give you drops of the water to cool your tongue because you're tormented in the flame. He can't. Not possible. And you can't come over here. He can't go to you. Nothing like that is ever going to happen. So our rich man has a brainchild. It says, then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. It's another familiar thing that happens. There's a lot of 5 brothers in some of these events that happen. I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. What does he want him to do? He wants Lazarus to be risen from the dead, go to his 5 brothers to tell them what Moses has already told them. To have Lazarus do it. Why would Lazarus have to rise from the dead? He's being comforted. Why do you want to take him out of the place of comfort, a place you weren't willing to give him in the first place, have him ripped from there, put back on earth, so he could tell your 5 brothers, who are also not listening to Moses, that they should listen to Lazarus? To his credit, he doesn't believe his brothers will listen to Moses. He didn't listen to Moses. His brothers aren't listening to Moses, and they never will. Abraham replied, they have Moses and the prophets who base a lot of their prophecies on Moses. Let them listen to them. They already have everything they need. But no, they already have everything they need. No, Father Abraham, he said, this is how much faith he has that his brothers will not listen to Moses. No, I hear what you're saying, but that's not going to work. Why not? But if someone from the dead goes to tell them, they will repent. Then they'll do it. And obviously this is a reflection forward into Jesus. Will people listen to Jesus when he returns from the dead? Will that really do the trick? He said to him, so Abraham said to him, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. What do you see? What do you see? What did Jesus want the people listening to that story when he told it? What did he want them to see? What do you see? We live in a Christian culture, and by that I mean the culture that actually is going to church and religiously involved and all that. We live in a church culture, is a better way to say it, where we take Moses and we shove him aside as if he means nothing. As if the wisdom and the law of Moses has nothing to give us. And we don't listen to Moses. We don't listen to Moses. Isn't that weird? Is there anything in that parable that says, don't listen to Moses? I'll rephrase it. Don't read your Old Testaments. Go out and get yourself a New Testament Bible with maybe the Psalms, but that's it because you don't need that Old Testament stuff anymore. That is not what Jesus says. You see, for them, they had to open their eyes and see that just because they were blessed in a certain way with wealth did not mean that they were living and doing the will of God as given to them in the law of Moses. That's not what those provisions meant. Those provisions, rather, were an opportunity for them to apply and live according to the law of Moses, but this rich man and his brothers were not. And therefore, they were not in the kingdom of God. Despite, everything looked visually to them, they were not. Because if they had been, Lazarus would not have had to have waited to be dead to be comforted. Because they were listening to Moses. And they were doing what Moses told them to do. What do you see? What do you see about your own life as you look at this story about a rich man and a poor man? When you look at your own situation and your own relationships, sometimes people want preachers to tell them exactly what to do. That is not what I do. Sometimes I do. Most of the time, I want you to walk out of here and go, what am I supposed to do with this? That's what I want. Because that's what parables do. Read this story. What do you see? What do you walk away with? What questions do you have as you read it? Questions about the story, questions about what you're supposed to do with the story, questions about, I don't even know, if someone said, find the law of Moses in the Bible, I might not even know where to go. What am I supposed to do with this? In what way can this story shake me awake? That's a question that only we can ask ourselves, or you can go home and talk about it as a family, or hang out in the lobby, or hang out after. Hey, what'd you think of that? That story of Jesus, that was a wild story. What'd you think about it? What does that mean to you? These are conversations we have in community, and there are conversations we have internally within ourselves. What do you do with the story of the rich man and Lazarus?